In the next part of the section, we're talking about inverse functions. So our symbol that we use is going to be in function notation. So we would read this as f inverse of x. Okay, so f inverse of x is how we read that. Okay. Now, if f and f inverse are inverses, then f of a equals b. And this is not a typo. This is if and only if f inverse of b equals a. So again, that's the same idea as taking the point AB and then reversing it to be the point BA. Now, I did write out some directions on how to find the inverse from an equation, and it looks a lot more complicated than what it is. So basically what we're going to do, if we think about inverses, we're thinking about opposites. So if we have an equation and it's in function notation, first we're just going to replace this with a y. And then we would do the opposite of what we normally do. So instead of solving for y, we're now going to go back through and solve the equation for x. And then at the end, we would just switch our x and y around and then put it back into function notation using the f inverse symbol. And then for these, we are also going to state the domain and range of our original function and the inverse. So we're actually going to start with domain and range, and then we will go through and find the inverse function. So problem 4, this is a quadratic equation. So again, it's positive, so in general, our U shape is going to look something like this. Okay. So the domain for the original, so I'm going to put original, is going to be all real numbers. Okay. And then the range for this, so again, here's the bottom. So the vertex for this one, so there's nothing inside with the x. So the vertex is 0, 3. So the range is going to go from 3 up to positive infinity. And then eventually we're going to find the inverse. Now, again, without even knowing what the equation is, if we know the original domain and range, and we are specifically finding the inverse of that function, we just flip the domain and range of the original. So this is going to become my new domain. So it's going to go from positive 3 to infinity. And then the range is going to be all real numbers. Okay. So if we were to graph, since we have a U shape like this, and again, if we flip that, and you have to think when we flip it, we're actually reflecting it across that diagonal line. So what it's going to do is our U is actually going to open up sideways. And then here would be the vertex. Now again, to actually find this, so I'm going to leave a little bit of space here. So eventually we have to find our inverse equation. So I'm going to write that here, and all of this will be our answer to this problem. Okay. Now to find the inverse, again, I'm going to start by replacing this with y. So we have y equals x squared plus 3. And now I'm just going to get the x by itself. So we're going to start by subtracting the 3 over. So we have y minus 3 equals x squared. And then to get rid of the squared, we have to take the square root of each side. Now, because we're solving, we have to remember to use our plus minus. So we're not simplifying, we're solving. Solving, anytime we do an even root, we have to have the positive and the negative answer. So we would have plus and minus the square root of y minus 3. And then again, we're going to flip these two at the very end. And that's just so that we can graph them correctly. So this will be x minus 3 equals y. And then again, our function notation, we now replace y with our f inverse of x. So the final answer would be f inverse of x equals plus and minus the square root of x minus 3. And we actually need both plus and minus. So the positive radical is going to be the top part of our U shape when we graph it. And then the negative radical is going to be the bottom part. And we need both because as just one equation, that's technically not a function. The inverse is not a function for this one because this would not pass a vertical line test. So that's why we need that plus minus. So we're actually graphing two separate equations to get the inverse for this function. All right, let's go to the next one. So again, we're just going to start with the domain and range of the original. Okay, so again, this is a linear equation with a positive slope, so it's going to look something like this. So the domain is all reals and the range is all reals. So that means for the inverse, the domain is the range, so we just flip those, and then our range is going to also be all reals. And then we still need to figure out what the inverse function is going to be. So again, when we're done, all of this will be our final answer. So again, we're just going to start by replacing g of x with y. So y equals 3x minus 10. And then we're getting the x by itself. So we're going to add the 10 to each side. So y plus 10 equals 3x. And then we are going to divide everything by 3. So that means that we will have 1/3 y plus 10/3 equals x. And then we switch our x and y back. So 1/3 x plus 10/3 y. Plus 10/3 equals y. And then we just replace our y with our inverse notation. So 1/3 x plus 10/3 y. And for this one, it's not going to be a big deal. If you wanted to leave it at this step as y plus 10 over 3 equals x, and then when you flip it, it would be x plus 10 over 3 equals y. Those two forms mean the same thing. So I'm okay with either form. Usually we split it apart so we have a slope and a clear y-intercept, but you don't have to do that because, again, these two things mean the same thing. They're just written differently.